Okay, great. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Children Education Policy and Accountability Committee. I'm Councillor Helen Rowbottom. I'm the chair of this committee. We are, before we start, just a few housekeeping points. The meeting's being live streamed to the council's YouTube, so hello to anyone joining online, and by participating in this meeting, you're consenting to being recorded, so hope that's okay now that we are now live. If the fire alarm sounds, which it does almost every full council meeting here, so just leave the meeting, you kind of go down those stairs and the exit and out onto Shortlands, but we'll guide everyone there. And I will go around and do introductions shortly, but when you have an item, please do introduce yourself just to jog everyone's memory online. I've had apologies from Councillor Darryl Brown, and I believe that Councillor Sanderson and I can see Eleanor's already joined us online, as is Georgina from the council as well. So thank you for joining online, and Councillor Sanderson, I hope and think should be joining online shortly. So item 2, are there any declarations of interest before we begin? No? Okay, we'll just do a quick round of the room as we want to do and see who everyone is. So I'll maybe start turning to my right.
Hi, I'm Nandini Ganesh from Parents Active.
Good evening, Nadia Taylor, originally a parent governor representative, but a co-op team member now, a local resident, and also chair of Carers Network, so bringing that carer perspective too.
Good evening, Henry Leake, Head of Commissioning for Children, Young People, Learning Disabilities and Autism for the inner cluster of the Integrated Care Board.
Evening, Peter Haylock, Director of Education and SEND.
Good evening, Jackie McShannon, Strategic Director of Children's Services.
Good evening, Sarah Bright, Assistant Director, Children's Commissioning. Evening, Amanda Gordon, Operational Director, Children Young People Services.
Brilliant, and perhaps an almost seamless segue to...
Oh, apologies, everyone. I'm Councillor, as for lateness. I am Councillor Lucy Richardson. Thank you. Oh, turn this off. I didn't realise we were going to be in this.
Yes, we're bringing a very European Parliament energy to the room tonight, everyone who's being live streamed. So sorry, we're just getting up to scratch on this level of professionalism. So I'm going to move first just to check the minutes. Does everyone agree the minutes held on the 30th of January 2023 is an accurate record?
Yes.
Great. That's good. Good, excellent. And item 4, so first kind of meeting item of the night, we're going to be hearing about co-production in mental health provision for young people. So I'll hand over to Henry, and thank you very much for joining us on your evening after a long and busy day, I'm sure.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, and I'm presenting this on behalf of Angela, who's in my team, who unfortunately can't be with us today. This is about how we work with young people and indeed young adults, in fact, in order to co-produce the work that we do and the sort of services that we are trying to develop, both locally and across Northwest London. And our aim as an ICB is to listen to and work with people to develop and improve services. It's a key priority for our partnership approach to the work. So if I take you through the paper, so Northwest London Children's Mental Health and Wellbeing Local Transformation Plan, sorry about the sort of rather large descriptor, looks at the whole of the system in terms of mental health and wellbeing support across Northwest London. And the idea is to make sure that we are both working across Northwest London, but also working to deal with the specific issues and some of the specific partnership arrangements that we have within boroughs. So we are looking at both children and young people's services in general and all age crisis care in particular. And as it says in the paper, we are now really focusing on what we can do locally to make sure that our local partners are aligned and work with us in terms of our work. This involves a collaboration with commissioners, providers, clinicians, the local authority, our parent carers forums, which Nandini is obviously here to represent, to make sure that we are sort of pulling together all of the resources that we have within the borough to make sure that we are using in the most effective and efficient way, and addressing those local inequalities where we see them and where we know that they already exist. The transformation plan's a live document, and it reflects our views, also the local stakeholders. And as we need to develop it, we will go back to that document and review it. Hammersmith and Fulham is one of the areas where we've got mental health in schools teams, the MHST programme that is funded directly by NHSE. And the programme's been well established locally and now embedded and expanding into early access to emotional wellbeing and mental health interventions for children and young people in schools and colleges across England. In particular with Hammersmith and Fulham, we've got 25 educational settings within the area where we've got MHSTs actively working to support young people. They provide evidence-based information such as guided self-help group interventions for parents of primary school age children with anxiety or challenging behaviour, and they work directly with secondary school age children with low mood or anxiety. They also offer interventions such as Friends for Life for building resilience, or steps to help tackle exam stress. So those are particular programs that are focused on those particular areas. And we work with schools to develop that whole school approach to mental health and provide support to the designated senior lead for mental health, which most schools have, and or the link worker within the schools. And of course, we work quite closely with the school nursing teams through public health to ensure that there's a joined up approach to early intervention in mental health. What we're aware of is that the NHSE scheme hasn't released funding for every single school to have MHSTs at present. So what we've done locally is to ensure that Hammersmith and Fulham Mind offer every state school within the borough access to two programs, Be Kind to Your Mind and Learn Well programs, which offer workshops for year groups, psychoeducation sessions for teachers and parents, partnership work with educational psychology colleges for the SEN CYP cohort as well. We've got a particular resource locally, Rethink Mental Health, and we work with them and Young Minds to ensure that the voices and perspectives of people who have used local services are embedded in our work. And we're expanding that service user representation to ensure that delivery is guided by experts by experience. The Rethink project, co-producing co-production, sets out to explore and define children and young people's vision for emotional wellbeing and mental health co-production over the next 2 years, with the aim of the project to create a strong youth voice presence within the ICB. And there's more detail in Appendix 2. Shall I just give some examples that we've got in Appendix 1? Let's see if I can take you to that document. So these are some of the examples that we have where we're currently co-producing our work with young people. So we've got Rethink, as we said, and that's the idea of Rethink is to work with young people to create a youth voice within the ICB. And they are actively working, and you'll see in that Appendix 2 the detail of what that means. We have Young Minds for Mental Health. So Young Minds is currently recruiting champions to work with mental health trusts across the 8 boroughs where the MHST teams are involved. These young champions are that's the gold standard, if you like. So having people who understand the services, who can come in and actually work with the services to guide the way that practitioners work and to guide the way that the services are then provided. We've got the ASD Key Worker project. So within LBHF, we were one of the second boroughs within Northwest London to have the ASD Key Workers. And again, we've got young champions within that, the development of that service, who carry out some workshops with young people and families and the wider network. And they also help to develop that charter for learning disabilities and autism services across the patch. We have, on top of that, a PBSC, Positive Behavioural Support, Key Worker Plus working. And these is effectively training for families. And what we are doing is working with families to make sure that the PBSC, which is a sort of a key input into mental health services, that they work well with families, that they understand the needs of families, and that they can effectively support families to deal with those positive behavioural approaches that are required. West London CAMS, you can see two projects there with West London CAMS. So we've got the parent facilitators, and we are joining the local authority non-violent response team to co-deliver the NVR group for parents. And this is where we have peer support effectively. So it's parents hearing from other parents who've been through similar experiences and being able to learn and to share their experiences. We've also got CAMS clinicians joining the LGBTQ+ plus peer support and service user involvement group. And again, this is where we've got clinicians going in there and supporting families and young people to think about what their needs are and to sort of listen to how they want us to respond to their needs. Turning over the page, we've got the North West London Provider Collaborative. So just a bit of context. Across North West London, there are different groups of practitioners coming together in different ways. This one is the Mental Health Provider Collaborative. So they will often work with people where there are complex case issues or urgent care issues. And the idea is that we will work with them again to improve their ability to understand and to really use young people to develop those services that are quite key, obviously, at a time of crisis. So that's for the Mental Health Provider Collaborative. We've got a number of other ones in existence as well. We have the Cheney Child Development Service, which runs out of Chelsea and Westminster Hospital. And they make sure that any resources that they produce, that they always go through the parent carer forms and using children and young people who are using their service to ensure that the production of materials that they use are effective and meet the needs of people who are trying to read them and trying to understand them. The MHSTs, we have, as we've said, we've got Mind in H&F, run our MHSTs within Hammersmith and Fulham. And again, we've developed 3 young advisors to be trained up for interview panels, for example, and to be delivering training to various organisations and other resources that are around, again, just to make sure that we've got the voice of a young person with a lived experience within those services, that they make sure that they are key. We've got MenCap that are developing some paid work experience opportunities for young people to support other young people and their involvement, to make sure that they can ask for the reasonable adjustments that they need in order for them to be able to continue to work or to get jobs within the local environment. So one of the examples there, as you can see, it's they helped a tuition company catered for the needs of a young person by creating a support plan with a young person how enabled them to voice how they would like their education to be delivered by the tuition company. So it's working with both the young person and the organisation that person is placed within. And then finally, we've got the Parents Active group, so working with parents in focus groups, holding sessions and informal coffee sessions. Again, it's about sort of relying on that parent carer group to give information to direct the needs of that service group so that we can then sort of put in the appropriate services or information that will allow them to sort of understand and help us to co-develop future services. And that's it.
Great, thank you very much. I will open the floor and the virtual floor, as it were, to questions. I can see a hand up from Councillor Brown.
No, she's muted.
I think you may be muted, Councillor Brown. Okay, we can come back potentially. Does anyone else want to open? Yep, Councillor Richardson, I'll come back to you, Councillor.
Are you receiving? Yes, it's working. Yes, thank you for that. I was just wondering how Mind speaks to CAM, speaks to the school, how they all communicate together.
Yeah.
So people aren't repeating themselves, and how there's a sense of the different levels of support and how that's communicated.
So we've got within LBHF, we have it's effectively a mental health partnership group that deals with both young people and older adults. And that is about us bringing together all of the partners. So the MHSTs, the Minds, the MenCaps, the provider collaboratives, the clinicians that work across there, other voluntary sector organisations that are providing some of that wellbeing support. And it serves two purposes. One is that information sharing. So make sure that everyone knows who's doing what and who the links are, creating those relationships, because often it's about relationships within these organisations. But I think that the secondary aspect is around making sure that they're all aligned in terms of when they want to develop services. So thinking about, okay, so where are our gaps? What are the issues that we need to sort of think about? So one of the recent ones, of course, is we've developed a 16 to 25-year-old pathway within our CAMS to adult mental health services. And actually having them come to that group, talk to that group about what their plans were, listening to what that group had already in place, and then aligning all the work to make sure that it did fit properly together was a key aspect of that sort of that need to share and understand that sort of holistic view of the services across the patch. Yeah, so they meet together, and also because they've now met each other and sometimes in person, they've now got the relationship. So there's less of a reticence to ring up or who do I speak to, or I don't know who to talk to. Actually, they've saw someone in the meeting 2 weeks ago, so they'll have that one-to-one relationship and talk and have that discussion.
Just one follow-up. All these services, are they all available? Is it all clearly set out online? So everyone can access them.
So we think we have set it out clearly. So I know we've just developed almost like a template of the mental health and wellbeing services. We're currently just testing it, so we know it works really well for our staff and the sort of the clinicians, but actually we're testing it through, you know, the likes of Nandini's group and some of the young people, just to make sure that that's going to be understood. We think it sets it out really clearly, the different levels and the different understanding, but we just need to check it out, I think.
So it's all up there.
It's out there, and then it's about finding out where we put it up there. So we'd like it on the local offer. I mean, that's the best place for it. There you go. Yeah, and as that local offer develops locally, that we would be sort of wanting them to guide in that way. So
Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'll go next to Councillor Brown just because she had
Yes.
hand up.
Did you say my name? Sorry, I wasn't sure.
Yes, and we can hear you now, so all good.
Sorry, thank you. I'm sorry about that. I just wanted to, Peter, thank you very, or sorry, Henry, that was a very good presentation. Thank you. I just wanted to ask one question. In this borough, do the schools teach children how to regulate their emotions to improve their emotional intelligence? I mean, for example, facing traumas, whatever. Is that system in place?
So there's definitely support from various different organisations that go into schools. So we have COOTH, which is an online system. We have the MHSTs. We've got the experts within the schools who have a responsibility around mental health. But I'm going to share it with Peter, who might have a bit more clarity on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it would definitely be part of the traded offer that schools can buy into, and there's different, as Henry's been saying, that would be something that would be kind of formalised as part of that. The vast majority of schools will also have something within their PSHE programme of study, and ensuring that that's covering things from a range of different issues.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'll just
May I
because there's
come
a
in and
supplementary,
add?
go to
sorry.
Amina.
Thank you, Chair. So we also launched our Attachment Aware Schools Award. So we had 11 schools attend the launch of that event, and that is absolutely about making sure that we've got the right environments to support our children to be able to self-regulate, and also so that we're providing them the right support so that they can learn as effectively as possible. We had a little article that went into our staff newsletter, so I'm happy to share that with the group today so you can circulate with the minutes if that's helpful.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Lovely. Okay, I'm going to go around purely in order I saw you, which out of just proximity bias is Councillor Afzal Khan, and then we'll go to Nandini.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Leek, for your presentation. My question is about the mental health in schools team. So how do you measure the effectiveness of their work, and what feedback do you have, and what feedback mechanisms do you have in place to drive sustainable improvement in their work? For example, do you have any statistics on the number of students that have been supported by these schools teams, and any follow-up contact after presentations have been made?
We do monitor services with people that are being sick. What's interesting is that across North West London, the other 5 boroughs that aren't within that inner cluster, the mental health support teams come through the mental health trust. So West London or CNW manage those teams within the tribe area. We have our services. Sorry, David. You can hear me better now. Yeah, within Hammersmith and Fulham and Westminster and Kensington, they're done through the voluntary sector, and actually we have better outcomes through the voluntary sector. They're seeing more people than through our normal mental health trusts. But happy to share some of that data with you if that's what you would like.
Yes, I think some data would be very helpful, because then we can look at the effectiveness of these programs and how many students take it up. And is it actually helping anyone at the end of the day? Of course, mental health is a huge issue and it's very, very important. And I'm very glad that we have that service, but also to see how effective it is. It's good to have some kind of parameters to measure this on.
Definitely. And it's part of a bigger package, isn't it? So we've got not just the MHSTs, but we've got CAMS going into some schools. We've got Couth, as I said, which is the online resource. There's Be Kind to Your Mind. There are different organisations going into schools. Some of it depends a little bit on what the schools want. So the schools can choose if they have an MHST or if they've got some other service. Some people have had different services for a long time. They don't want to change. So, but we've got a bit of a mixed patchwork of different services. But what we are clear about is that each school has got something, and we can sort of look at that sort of uptake for those services.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. I'll move to Nandini.
Thank you, Chair. I have a lot of questions swimming through my mind. I'll try and internalize and try to ask some of those questions. I mean, in Appendix 1, you've listed a lot of providers, but actually there's a lot of varying degree of help isn't there, because some, like for example, Parents Active is the most rung in the calendar and in the ladder, because we support parents, we don't support young people. So some of it may be suitable for schools, mainstream children, some are suitable for SEN children. The mental health support teams in schools, are they suitable for SEN children? Do they also tackle behavior?
They don't tackle behavior as such. So there'll be some support around some of that dysregulated behavior, for example. But we would probably look to sort of get the support of the inclusion service, for example, as part of that bigger structure to support young people within schools. And where necessary, we'll use CAMS as well. So, but we've got lots of different cohorts of young people, haven't we? And it's about how we make sure that we've got all of their voices included, including the parents, of course.
Yeah. And inclusion support is Inspire. Are you talking about Inspire there?
So yeah, the inclusion support it's not just Inspire, it's part of the SEN support sort of team. So some of that will also be delivered through our SEMH support through outreach and other various different means. But it all comes through the same sort of SEND front door.
Now, and do special schools have access to mental health support services as well, or is it different for them?
No, it's exactly the same. Obviously, they would need to tailor it to the needs of the children so that it's appropriate. But they've got the same opportunities, and they would buy in or look to use the services which are most effective for them.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Okay, did you have something you wanted to?
A quick follow-up, actually, just based on a couple of mentions we've had about emotional regulation and emotional dysfunctional behaviour, and back really to Councillor Brown's point about training for that. It just occurred to me that one of the main disciplines is the occupational therapist who would deal with that. Is there any multidisciplinary working with occupational therapists, because one of their specialties is emotional regulation?
That helps, doesn't it? I don't know, if I'm honest, Councillor Richardson. I would assume that they would definitely be part of any MDT discussions because they're part of those teams, and I'm sure that they would be people who would be brought in to discuss complex cases, for example, if they're involved with the young person.
So I think, from my understanding, obviously the occupational therapist will be involved in any kind of EHCP or education healthcare planning, for example. If they're named within the plan, then they would obviously be part of the multidisciplinary team. I think it just depends on a pupil by pupil, or young person by young person basis.
Thank you. It's just an area, it just occurred to me that sort of cross-working might be useful.
Great, thank you. I'm Eleanor, you've had your hand up patiently, and then I'll come to you, Nadia.
Yes, I hope you can hear me. The question is about attendance. How far attendance at CAMS appointments is affected, and also how far mental health itself affects school attendance, and whether you're able to draw lines together about this.
So yeah, so mental health, I think it's fair to say we would know will have an impact on school attendance, and that's something that we look at very, very carefully. So we work with every school in the local authority with a new attendance team that's focusing in on that. We're also putting together a toolkit and advice and guidance for schools to work with children who are not attending school because of emotionally based reasons. And that's something that's being prepared across a number of different multidisciplinary teams to provide that advice for schools, because it is a real challenge, and it's something that's obviously become far more exacerbated after the pandemic, with children being at home for such long periods of time.
Thanks, Helen. I will pick up on some of my questions that I have that I'm kind of pausing on relate to gathering of data and correlating, but I'll go first to Nadia.
Thank you. I am involved in an applied research project, which is led by Imperial, focusing on young people and mental health, and particularly identifying sort of neurodiversity in school settings. I wondered if you think schools will be willing to sort of collaborate, to work together to engage with the project, because obviously vital data is collected in a school setting, and if so, whether so we could work together in making that happen, as it were. Thank you.
I think that's with me, but yes, definitely. That's something I'm sure that schools would be keen to get involved in.
Great, Nadia, if you could send some information through, we'll make sure it's connected in. Nandini.
No, I was just wondering, how does emergency mental health support fit into all this? And the reason I'm asking this is we face so many parents having lot of escalation in behavior and lot of escalation mental health problems, especially after COVID. I mean, it's always there in SEN children, and they always wait for that CAMS appointment, which comes, say, 2 months later, 3 months later, and they need the help now. Sometimes going to the GP also does not help because they don't know what to do, especially when it comes to special education needs. It can be because of SEN, it can be because of pure mental health reasons, and nobody's able to unpick. And we face so many parents like that asking for help, asking us to help them. How does this fit in with all these kinds of support?
So I think sort of emergency support is quite a tricky area, isn't it? Certainly, we have systems in place. So we have what we call it the dynamic support register, for example. So if someone is at risk of their placement breaking down or their home environment is becoming untenable, for example, then what we would do, we would ask for that person, the young person, to be put on the dynamic support register, which then allows all of our sort of partners to come together and have a sort of very quick emergency discussion about, okay, what do we need to do? So that's when we bring in all that multidisciplinary team around the young person. So that be that CAMS or be that PBSC or the social care. But it's, yeah, trying to sort of make sure, okay, we can see something's going wrong. What do we do to stop that deterioration happening? So that's the extreme, if you like.
I actually, it's not just a family situation breaking down. It's just the fact of the nature of the disability, which brings about a sudden escalation behavior. And we see a lot of that among parents. I mean, parents come to us and ask us for advice around their children, asking us, where should we go? I didn't get that CAMS appointment. And those are the tricky gray areas, I suppose, where possibly the services are struggling with. Due to autism, due to other disabilities.
Yeah, different parts to it. And I think there are probably different routes as well with some of that emergency response. So some of it might be going back to the Child Development Service, for example, because actually they could provide some training and support for the parents in terms of maybe giving them different ways that they can help to manage their children, if you like. I think it does depend very much on the individual child, but I think what we would say is if there are escalations, then just make sure that those escalations come through to somebody within the system if we're hitting a brick wall in some way. So that could be through the ICB, or it could be through escalating within CAMS, or it could be through going through the schools and getting the school nurses to escalate those issues. But there are different ways of doing it.
Thank you. Henry, I know that ICSs and ICBs are relatively newly formed as a legal entity, and there have been obviously many iterations. And I'm sure a lot of the insights that people are operating on to structure priorities for programs are things that professionals have known for years. I'm not saying it's novel, but I wonder to the degree that ICSs are obviously forming to provide strategic oversight. I just wanted to zoom out a bit and get an understanding of the overall infrastructure. Is data being collected, and do you feel sufficiently connected across different sources? I think there've been a few questions on that. I also wondered if information will be benchmarked. I know it's harder to capture for mental health than other sort of health areas, but whether there is, funding is going to be responsive to impact, or essentially how sophisticated a conjoining of information is, because we've got a sense of a lot of the activity, but I think in terms of what drives it, I just want to make sure it's as kind of live responsive as possible to needs. And I understand you represent a bigger area than Hammersmith and Fulham, but it'd be good to hear if, I guess, kind of by proxy of working with nodes into communities or schools, you get that lens through there, but it's whether there are particular issues. It would be interesting to have highlights of particular areas of focus for Hammersmith and Fulham. Thank you.
So across Northwest London, we're quite fortunate to have a system called WISIC, which is Cold Systems Information C. I don't know what the C is actually. but it pulls together lots of data from different data sources. So it comes from GP records, it comes from the acute trusts, it comes from some of the mental health trusts, and we've got some adult social care information also going into that system. And what that allows us to do is to do that comparator to see where we've got anomalies of data or groups of people where they aren't accessing the services that we would expect them to access and that sort of stuff. I think we're at a reasonably early stage in terms of that population health management using of that data, but it's certainly one of the things that our focus is now, having got that data and starting to build in even more data as part of that process. It's quite key for us to sort of use that as our focus of future work. And certainly one of our key areas is sort of main areas of deprivation. So those people who live within the 20 most deprived areas, 20% that are most deprived, excuse me, across the area. That does allow us to do some comparative work, so we can see, uptake of mental health services in different areas. There'll certainly be some sort of how do we make sure that we have equality of access across the patch at some point. It's definitely the way we're moving. But that's not something that's going to change overnight. We have to sort of think about how we build up services in different areas where there are deficits, for want of a better word.
Great, thank you. And do colleagues in the room feel that necessarily the data that's the most insightful to layer on top of each other is always captured? Because I know health have a certain amount of information and councils actually have a lot of gold dust data, and there are varying degrees of sensitivity, but do colleagues in the room feel that that's being kind of analysed at a meta enough level and concurrently? And say and I guess it tells a certain story of people who say, not sure.
I don't think we've had sight of any data at some of the meetings that we've been going to, but I think it's something that we would definitely want to explore and how we could take that forward. So welcome. Don't know what format it comes in, but it would be good to get something together. Sure.
So I was just thinking around the looking at the ASD strategy, for example, and what public health have done locally is to look at the health data to see that sort of health data, and they've overlaid it with their deprivation and their sort of local knowledge around the population. So I think as we develop the sort of the data sets that come through to inform a lot of our work, we are doing some of that overlay. So I'm confident that I think we're going in the right direction.
Great. It would be good to know how we can kind of ongoing be in a rhythm of plugging that together, because I guess that, in the same way that with council programs who obviously have to evidence the impact, I'm sure, and I know it's all very nascent, but it would be very valuable to be involved in being able to overlay that. We have a great business analytics team here who've got access to data. So even if we had to kind of broker, I don't want to speak on their behalf, but it would be interesting to pursue and maybe would help evaluate some of the programs or interventions or funding injections. It could just be another level of rigor. And in complement to that, we also obviously as a council have amazing relationships and kind of nodes into community. So on the co-production piece, I wondered if that's already conjoined about. I was wondering where you kind of have access to already have a pooled group of people, whether we could support by offering access to some of the, I guess trust is key. We've kind of built up trust. In fact, for some of our meetings, we often have like a wonderful rota of young people coming in. So it would be, we're very happy to, I think I'm looking at the team to just check the capacityometer, but very happy to sort of work together on that, because I'm sure there's complete commonality and overlap of things experienced or objectives of your programme, but I'll pipe down in case I've just said a wrong thing.
I think we've got Henry and I work quite closely together, and we've got a bit of a working group. We did a big piece of review this time last year, and a lot of the actions that have come out of that Henry's been talking about this evening. So that collaboration is absolutely there. I think we could look about how we share that data in a system way. I'm not a techie person, but I'm sure we could absolutely have a look at that. And there's probably a role for public health as well in terms of JSNAs. So I think that's probably the most formal route that we could probably look to doing that, because they've got the skills and capacity to do that, not me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And public health have access to the WISIC data, so they can go in and do that sort of granularity that we require. It does get, you do get some tricky situations in terms of information sharing when it comes down to identifiable individuals. And we are doing some work in some of the other areas to try and how do we make sure that we've got really good PID, personal, identifiable data agreements that we can share some of that sort of granularity. Because actually when we want to go down to doing some specific work with individuals or groups, we need that data sharing agreement. But we're just trialing that out in various different places at the moment. So
Yes.
As regards co-production, Henry and Joe Beatty and I working together with a couple of residents on co-production. So there's already the links there with social care.
Brilliant. Great. That's me being a lot more out the loop than day-to-day colleagues. Jackie.
And thank you. You also, Councillor, asked about sort of co-production with young people and sharing. Of course, we have the Youth Council, which is very active, but what's been really reassuring from this presentation is the particular emphasis on service users, young service users, so that I think mental health services actually having a dynamic relationship with those young people who are direct users is really important, as well as with the wider group of young people that the Youth Council. And I think that's that sort of going from the generic to the particularity is really important. And I'm really pleased to hear that. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Any other, having a sweep around the room, the virtual room? No, good. Thank you so much, Henry. And I will move now to the next item on school performance report for academic year 2021-22. So I hand over to Peter Haylock, and I know that Georgina joins us online as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So I've taken the liberty of just putting the report into some PowerPoint slides, if that's okay, just so that it's a bit easier to follow, because I appreciate the report was reasonably dense and there was a lot of tables. So that was the main piece of feedback. So first and foremost, I think the sort of key theme for this really is that we should really be celebrating some outstanding performance from our schools at every level. As you'll hear me say the words above national average an awful lot in the next 5 or 6 minutes or so, because that's pretty much exactly where we are. And we're extremely pleased with how well our schools have performed. So the first thing, I'll just move on to slide 3, if that's okay, David, and I'll come back to the summary just at the end. So in terms of early years performance, the two best ways to measure early years performance are through what's called the good level of development, which is against the early years framework, and also the phonics performance. As you can see here, we're comparing data to 2019 because obviously within the 2020 and 2021, there was no data recorded because of the pandemic. I should also say at this point that the government has a very large, if you've looked at the comparing performance tables website, where a lot of this information comes from and comes in quite a lot of detail, there's a big health warning that sits at the top of it, which is saying that you really should not be comparing schools to previous years or comparing schools with schools, because the issue we have is that the pandemic has created that kind of gap in data, which means that we've got kind of some sort of real kind of issues in terms of comparing and looking at trends, etc. So it's worth factoring that in. However, I'm going to kind of not necessarily ignore that advice, but just kind of point you in the direction of some of the key themes that we can see. So the first thing is that you'll see that against national average, we are obviously performing well in terms of good level of development in terms of Hammersmith and Fulham, but there has been a dip since 2019. This is not necessarily due to the pandemic, but also due to the way that early years is being graded. So there was a change in the grading system in terms of the early years framework, which led to what was expected as a national decline that I suspect has also been exacerbated by the impact of the pandemic, etc. So Hammersmith and Fulham continues to perform well, but is a key area of focus for us to ensure that we can start pushing back towards our kind of 2019 levels, etc. Similarly with phonics, the phonics performance is excellent. We can say it's well above the national average. There again has been a dip since 2019, and that is probably more pandemic related than the early years good level of development. In terms of Key Stage 2, we don't have any data for Key Stage 1 in terms of comparing national performance. So I've moved on just on to Key Stage 2 in terms of the data sets here. We can see again that Hammersmith and Fulham has very much exceeded the national average. And I think most importantly for me, the dip in performance is not as great as we saw nationally. If you look at the kind of the blue bar against the orange one, you can see that the kind of standard nationally has decreased quite significantly since 2019, and the Hammersmith and Fulham performance has stayed slightly lower but relatively stable. The performance of SEND pupils, we don't have comparative data to use, but you do see, obviously, there is a gap, as would be expected, in terms of the performance of EHCP children, but we are just about double the national average, which was obviously happy with, but something that we need to look at kind of very carefully moving forward. And our children with SEN support, which is the layer who do not have an EHCP but are still defined within the kind of the SEN system, they've again very much performed much better than the national average at 36% compared to 21%. So again, we're very happy with the Key Stage 2 performance across all of our primary schools. So moving on.
Just before we do,
Yep.
Peter, do you mind just explaining the difference between the expected standard and greater depth? Just for
Yeah, sorry.
just a bit technical.
So yeah, expected standard is basically exactly what it says. So it's scoring of 100 or around 100. And then the greater depth is the performance kind of the top end, so getting towards 110. So it's done on a distribution curve, and it's much, obviously the greater depth is a much higher kind of level of standing in terms of the Key Stage 2 performance. And yeah, as you'll see there, nationally it was way below 10% got the performance in that, and ours was just above. And again, you can see there's not necessarily been a dip like there was nationally in terms of the Hammersmith and Fulham performance. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Sorry, so in terms of Key Stage 4, there's a number of different data sets here for you to kind of peruse. So the main thing to say is that so the national average for some reason comes out at minus 0.03, and no one's ever been able to explain that to me, because it really should just be 0. So I don't know why it's minus 0.03. But what this means for Hammersmith and Fulham is that at 0.37, it means on average for every GCSE that was taken across the local authority, we're over a third of a grade above. So if you were at 1, you would be 1 grade above for all of your GCSEs. So being at 0.37 means you're about a third of a grade above on average across all of the schools, which is obviously fantastic. And this relates to the attainment 8, which is 57.4 compared to 48.9, and that again is a significantly higher in terms of attainment. And also pans out into the grade 5s at English and Maths, which are 16% above the national average. The EBAC entry is also significantly higher in Hammersmith and Fulham, and they're the kind of 4 key sort of data metrics that are looked at across the different schools. So EBAC is the English Baccalaureate, which is not a qualification; it's a suite of qualifications. So to classify as being entered for EBAC, you would need to do English, Maths and Science, 1 of History or Geography, and a modern foreign language. So they're the kind of key things, but they're different GCSEs which combine to give that EBAC entry. In terms of SEN measures, we've broken this down into performance in terms of children with an education healthcare plan and those who are at SEN support. And as you can see, Again, similarly to at Key Stage 2, the performance is significantly better than the national average. The EHCP's got 9.8% compared to 6.9%, whereas SEND support, actually, you see a significant difference compared to the national average at 40.1 compared to 22.4. That data then sort of translates through into the attainment 8, which again is similar in line or just above for EHCPs, but significantly higher for SEND support. And that relates to the progress data. So you'll see kind of as expected for a child with an education healthcare plan, their progress is much lower than the national average. But that doesn't necessarily match the same with our SEN support, where you're actually getting close to the national average for children who don't have SEN support, whereas nationally they achieve under half a grade less. And then at Key Stage 5, the trend doesn't almost complete. So at A level, we have done better than the national average, but unfortunately, in our vocational level 3 qualifications, we are slightly below. That is kind of partly based, I think, on progress measures rather than anything else kind of moving forward. But overall, the performance at A level, there's more detail in the report, was very, very strong. I've then included in here some information on attendance and exclusions and things like that. So so the attendance data has actually remained in a positive position in terms of Hammersmith and Fulham. The one piece of data that I did ask for to be checked 3 times was our persistent absence, because somehow nationally it seems to have doubled, and in Hammersmith and Fulham ours has remained exactly the same. And I promise you I've asked that to be checked 3 times, because when I read it for the first 2 times I was sure it must be incorrect, but I'm told that that is the case. So obviously the schools have been working very hard on that kind of persistent absence to make sure it maintain its static nature, and that's something that we've continued to push through. Then in terms of exclusions, I've got a very small percentage of permanent exclusions. That has increased ever so slightly into this academic year, which was always to be expected. And our suspensions again remains kind of reasonably low in comparison to England, which is ever so slightly higher than the London average. So that's something that we will continue to work with schools on. Finally, so 2 more areas to focus on, apologies. The first is our NEET figure, our not in employment, education and training. This was a concern for us in 21-22. It wasn't necessarily down to the actual number of NEETs. It was down to a number of unknowns, but this was more due to a tracking issue than anything in terms of a concern in terms of us not knowing where the children were. That's something that we've resolved by bringing that back in-house into the local authority. And we've already seen a significant improvement, and this data will continue to improve during the next kind of 18 months, 2 years, as we track that data far more carefully moving forward. So it's something that we were able to identify and act on, and make sure that we had the situation kind of fully under kind of scrutiny. We then have a little bit more information on the children within our virtual school. Obviously, the cohorts here in terms of size don't really lend themselves to big percentages and all of those things. So I thought it was far more useful just to leave in the specifics about the young people themselves. So again, I really feel that there's some real strength in these results in terms of the overall performance. Obviously, by definition, these children come with kind of different kind of specific needs, etc. So 5 of the children of the 7, for example, in Key Stage 2, who are in the final year of Year 6, have got an education healthcare plan. So if you link back to the results that we saw previously, that the results there in terms of Key Stage 2 performance are actually extremely good, because obviously linking in to what the national data set, you would say actually they've outperformed. At Key Stage 4, again, it's a very small cohort of 17 young people. Again, due to the nature of the different needs that come in terms of the children, there's different bespoke programs that we put in place, whether it be an English as additional language program or other things like that, to make sure that children and young people can have the maximum chance of success. And again, in the nature of the programs and the delivery, the results here again are a real strength. Finally, and I think it's probably the best place to finish with this report. Well, actually, I've got one more thing after this, but the best thing to finish in terms of the results is the fantastic performance of our Key Stage 5 young people, and the fact that you've got so many people there doing and completing level 3 qualifications and then going on to university is just superb. And when I read through all of this and the information that was sent by Amelia Steele, who leads the virtual school, it was a real pleasure to be able to kind of focus on this as a key part. So just to give you the detail of that, we've currently got 30 care leavers who are attending university from a wide different range, whether it be from Cambridge to St Andrews in terms of the distance of the entire nation, really, from Brighton all the way to Scotland. And they're doing a number of different qualifications and kind of different levels. So you can see there we've got some who are obviously even doing their 4th years and master's qualifications. So it's a massive level of success and something to be really proud of. Yeah, so that's the information on the children and young people. The next slide is slightly early in terms of its presentation, but is obviously also phenomenal, which is why we bring it here today. So the reason it's slightly early is we're still waiting for 2 Ofsted reports to be published, but we obviously know the results of those Ofsted reports. So that's why we're incredibly pleased to announce that as we speak at the moment, 100% of our schools across Hammersmith and Fulham, whether it be special schools, primary schools or secondary schools, are at good or outstanding in terms of their Ofsted. So that is something that we're obviously very, very proud of. We're still sitting at 38% in terms of outstanding. We do expect that to reduce slightly as we move through the reports for the rest of the year, because that's what we know is we're seeing in terms of a national trend. But that's obviously way above the national average as it was in August. And our percentage of goods is sitting at 62%, which obviously we're extremely proud of. And that brings me more or less to the end of the report.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Peter. Love a bit of breaking news.
Yeah.
That's
It's not even
that's
broken
amazing.
yet, Councillor. That's the problem.
Oh, well, I hate to mention the live stream, Peter. That's whoops. That's amazing. That's brilliant. Wow. Okay, I have loads of questions, but I don't necessarily want to hog the mic. Actually, I'll come to some at the end. But does anyone else want to open with any questions, or can I hog the mic? Councillor Richardson, no, go for it. Go on. I've got about 7 questions.
Oh, okay. Yeah, first of all, that's brilliant news. How are with the stuff in the press about Ofsted and the stress on head teachers and generally teachers at the moment, how are we going to celebrate with the teachers? And really, I think it might be a good idea to plan some sort of celebration.
That's something Jackie and I have already spoken about.
Brilliant.
Summer. Yeah, we kind of, I think Jackie was quite keen to be saying before Easter, but unfortunately the reports haven't been released yet. We going to hold that up our sleeve. I think being a head teacher is incredibly stressful.
Yeah.
Has become very obvious. And we spoke with head teachers just last week, myself and Georgina, just to make it clear that yes, we are there to make sure people are held accountable and kind of delivering the job, because we need to make sure that children get the best possible education. But most importantly, we're also there to provide the level of support that's required. Firstly, so that people can be a success with an inspection or with any other areas of the school that they want to develop. Also, thank you, Henry. But also to make sure that we're there to support them, to support their staff, because it can be very lonely when you're sitting at the top of the pyramid, for want of a better description, and you'll have a lot of staff bringing you a lot of concerns and problems, and we need to be able to provide the support to head teachers where we can.
Thank you. And just a couple more quick ones. I think it's really impressive, the figure for the non-attenders, the persistent non-attenders. And because I know the sixth form college where I'm a governor, I think it is based on reality, because I've been so impressed with the work they've been doing, and it's really outstanding. So I think it's worth taking a dive into that to actually look at those practices in detail.
Definitely.
Because they are impressive.
So that's something that we've been spreading across the team. So it was actually some funding that I believe Jackie and Amina got in way before I started in the role, which we've been able to kind of utilize and move into the education team to get out and continue to support schools. So as well as being supportive, obviously we come at it with the position that every child should be in school at 95-96%, and make sure that the systems are kind of there to support them with that, because we know that from when it comes to mental health or anything else, the best place for children to be is in school.
Yeah, absolutely. The other question is about how we're supporting schools to make the change. Now BTECs are being scrapped towards, is it T level or TBAPs?
Yeah, so that is a significant challenge. It's not, then the BTECs, I believe, are not disappearing completely, so they will remain as they will remain as an applied general qualification, which at the moment is positive. So schools themselves will need to make the decisions around which T levels they move towards. Obviously, apart from William Morris, the rest of the secondary school or A-level provision is run via academies. So that's something that they would need to kind of put in place themselves. And then we would look to see how we kind of create any opportunities through the learning partnership for them to work together.
Brilliant. I fully support the idea of a celebration. Just before we move to the next question, I was overall thinking underneath all of these statistics, there's like so much, technical intelligence, commissioning intelligence, like on the ground intelligence that have informed a model that's got these results. And I hope that, National are looking to you and seeing what your ingredients are. That means to give extra work, but if there's any way to position that be for additional grant funding or whatever is, kind of beneficial to you as a group, like, do you feel empowered to go and shout about it and help us raise the profile of it? Because, you kind of earned it, and I hope it's rewarded and remunerated, I guess, in certain ways that it can be, or recognised at the very least.
We meet regularly with the DFE, and once it is official, because Peter has broken it a little bit prematurely, but we'll certainly, we're not backwards in trying to promote what we do, and also to volunteer ourselves where appropriate to help others. Equally, we like to learn from other local authorities so that it's sort of mutually beneficial.
Very good politician's answer there, Jackie. But yes, noted. Okay, Councillor Sulkan.
Thank you for the presentation, first of all, and many congratulations to the entire school team. The schools have done so well in Hammersmith and Fulham. That's fantastic news. And thank you for collating all this data. I'm just having a quick look at the Hammersmith and Fulham GCSE results, that table, and I can see that a lot of schools have gained 9 to 4 maths and English GCSEs above 90%, above of 80%, which is fantastic. And I was thinking, in terms of the Learning Schools Partnership Program that HNF has, there's a lot that these schools can offer to some of the schools who haven't achieved such grades. And perhaps just looking at this kind of data, the partnership becomes probably even more important and precious in terms of information that heads of departments and heads of subjects can probably share.
So it's relatively complex because at the moment the learning partnership very much runs in the primary schools. So there are a number of different meetings that exist for the secondary. So we have the secondary head meetings, which meet once every half term, Senko meetings, etc. So it is something that we're looking to promote and develop, but it would require our kind of academy partners, etc., to kind of buy into that process. So the majority of the academies and so on will be working with each other anyway, and that's something that obviously we will look to promote. And then you've got a number of the kind of larger trusts, for example, United Learning or ARC, etc., where some of the really strong performance has changed and improved. And yeah, so the schools will always be looking to do that work together, but it's very much in a peer-to-peer approach rather than something that we've necessarily got a system to promote within the local authority at the moment. But it is something that we're looking to potentially develop once we've really made sure that our maintained primary schools have got a really secure learning partnership to work off.
Great, thank you, Nadia.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Just a very quick question. Out of interest, how many schools do we have in Hammersmith and Fulham that are led by United Learning or ARC? You know, how many sort of academy partners or partnerships do we have, if you know?
It's a bit of a test, that one. So in terms of United Learning, there are 4 primary schools and 1 secondary, and they are predominantly located in the south of the borough. And in ARC, which is the one I should know best, but now I've forgotten, there is one that's all through at the moment that will soon become just a secondary. And then there are 3 other primary schools. So you've got ARC Swift that is becoming ARC White City. You've got ARC Bentworth and ARC Conway. They're the 2 largest kind of larger partners, but we also work with the Oat Academy Trust that runs runs the Bridge Academy and Courtyard, which is our alternative provision. We also have Futures that it runs Phoenix, and then there's other sort of kind of single academy trusts or multi-academy trusts, for example, Fulham Cross Academy. And also there's a number of schools that are joining the Catholic Academy Trust, which is operating from Cardinal Vaughan, and then there's a number of primary schools that are joining that.
Thank you. And could I just ask, just a bit of a follow-up from this, how, I hope this is it's not obviously a comparison, but I just wondered whether, obviously, because we've looked at a lot of data and data is actually incredibly interesting. How would you say do they rate in terms of sort of bringing schools that, because, you know, very often you have schools that were on their own, they were single academy or just standalone schools, which then become part of a multi-academy trust. Which of the 2 main academy partnerships are better equipped to elevate schools to a higher Ofsted rating, would you say? Just I
don't think it would be fair for me to answer that question, sorry.
The reality is that we have such a rich landscape and a very complex landscape, and I don't think we just could make those generalizations. I think it would be, I understand where the question's coming from, and I'm going to be a politician here, but actually the reality is that it's too complex to make any, you know, generalized response. So, yes, yeah. One of the hallmarks of H&F is the way that everybody works together. And when Georgina has actually compiled information around for the learning partnership, we recognize that we got a bit of everything, which is complex, but also, as I said before, very rich. And the fact that people work so well together, both in a formal way through the learning partnership and informally through, for example, the secondary heads, is a real tribute.
Great, and actually just shout out to Georgina, who I gather through probably relentless work in delivering to the finish line has lost her voice, but thank you so much, Georgina. Yes, Nandini.
No, just quick questions. I mean, NEET, does it include SEN pupils? Like some may leave without and may not be in educational settings. So do you include them in the data?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So that's that we track them very, very carefully. So that some of that work is done through the EHCP team, the casework team, and also working with other kind of colleagues in different institutions, etc. So most definitely.
Again, it's an excellent achievement. Just one very quick question. I mean, are all the schools full? Because I think we had a CPAC once where we were discussing the roles in schools and whether it's to full capacity or not.
So no, so there is a concern in terms of some of the school roles and the fact that there's been a significant decrease in the birth rate, which I know is out in the census data, and that's something that we're looking at quite carefully.
Sadly, excellent schools don't equal number of pupils to go to them in inner London anymore. So I actually had a few questions about where you had like an exceptional kind of aspects of the data, and I guess some of the narrative, if you wanted to talk about some of the narrative underneath it. So one of them was the SEN sort of outcomes 9 to 5 in English and maths, GCSE. The other was how you mentioned your persistent absence statistic, Peter, that you double triple checked, which was, you know, given if there's like a COVID lag or like I would just be fascinated to know any analysis or even if it's speculative underneath it. And the other was, oh yeah, the not knowns component of NEETs. Could you talk a little bit more about that cohort, just for people's understanding?
And it's that principle of sharing the practice that I think is really, really positive.
Just is it to manage? Is it that we're specialist in it, and the wraparound support is specialist versus national averages? Is that a sort of broad conclusion? Yep, great, thank you. Sorry, I cut you off.
Consequently, we have brought the kind of the tracking of the NEET data back into the team, and one of the colleagues works with others to kind of collect that and collate that information.
Yeah. Is it a phenomenon experience? Sorry, is it like a cities phenomenon? Is it like a
not necessarily? Last year's was an anomaly and something that we really needed to address, and that's something that we have done so. Where if you look at how we compare to our statistical neighbours, we're now pretty much in the middle. We're waiting for the final data set. So NEET data is measured, hopefully Georgina will be able to tell me if I'm wrong, in December, January and February. So by the time we get to the end of March, we'll be able to look back through that information to make sure that everything's robust in terms of that. So that's why when we were putting the PowerPoint together, the report together, it obviously just reports on the first 2 data sets.
Got you, brilliant. And the persistence absence, we had a lot less persistent absence, which
Yes.
as a trajectory, it'd be interesting to have any of your thoughts under why that is.
It's a very good question. And so I think the key again is it comes down to the fact that if your education is good, then you want to go to school. And where you've got kind of concerns around whether it be the quality of lessons or problems around behaviour or all of the things that flow from that is where you often see issues around persistent absence. And where you've got a strong culture within a school and where there's a culture of achievement and there's better tracking, the likelihood of someone being persistent absent and being in that group for a long period of time is likely to be lower. So I strongly suspect it's a kind of causal link between our education performance, the quality of the school education, which obviously comes through the measured through the Ofsted inspections, and then children wanting to be in school and therefore there being a lower percentage of persistent absence.
Yeah, so it seems like a sensible virtuous circle. Councillor Afzal.
I just have one question, following on from something you mentioned about the vocational qualifications and the sixth form data, the A-level results that HNF had produced results that were lower than the national average. Just want to pick your brain in terms of why do you think that is, or is there something that we need to do in terms of our vocational offer?
Again, because they mainly within academies, it's very difficult to give you a kind of honest answer. What I can say is that there's a strong likelihood based on the institutions which are delivering those courses that they are taking children onto level 3 qualifications at a slightly lower level in terms of their GCSE performance to give them that opportunity to be a success. So sometimes measuring that tracking can be quite difficult. The other point to say about vocational performance is that the national data that we're comparing to is the equivalent of a distinction minus. That's obviously an extremely high benchmark in terms of vocational performance. And I think ours comes out at a merit plus, so it's not significantly lower. It's just the way it kind of sits in the graph.
And just a follow-up question on that, usually the students who do sit the vocational qualifications, what percentage of them are EL students or students with SEN?
I don't know, I'm afraid, sorry.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, any more questions? I'm realised that it was a bit hard to see the screen when we had the PowerPoint up. So is there anyone online who wanted to ask or add anything? No? Okay, I will maybe just check we don't have. So thank you so much. I mean, I cannot laud you enough. I mean, 100% is quite literally, that's, well, you know, powers that be.
I do 100% clarify that I'm
Georgina.
taking no credit, Councillor Robon.
Well, I'm looking at you, Peter, but you're a symbol of the local school
Georgina
system.
needs to definitely take some credit because it's her team that do the work.
Yeah.
But it really is on the schools themselves and the fantastic jobs that the head teachers are doing. All we really, I'm not belittling it because Georgina does an awful lot of work with the schools, but what we do is provide the support and the guidance, and then they really need to deliver it on the ground.
Yeah, this is to the entire ether of Hammersmith and Fulham, exceptional work, but it is exceptional. And I think, you know, the infrastructure underneath it, yes, I'm a school governor, I see that absolute, you know, time, love, energy that people put into the jobs, relentless during the pandemic, like unbelievably resilient people. So all of it is recognised in numbers and stories people know, but I hope the numbers help you tell a story and benchmark it nationally because it is exceptional. I think that is it. So just to note that the dates of the future meetings, we've got the 3rd of July is our next one, and then we've got a break then until 13th of November. So just pop those in your calendar. Hot dates, I'm sure. And thank you so much for attending and for the work that's reflected in these reports from everyone.